Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a subject that is going to sound, at first blush, like the driest thing we could possibly choose.
hmm
It's something you likely ignored on your way to work today, or maybe you're sitting inside one right now and taking it completely for granted. We are talking about multifamily residential housing.
It does have a certain bureaucratic ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Multifamily residential.
Yeah, totally.
It sounds like a file you'd lose in a cabinet at the planning
It
department.
really does. It sounds like zoning code.
hmm
But as I was, reading through the stack of research for this, I realized we aren't really talking about buildings. We're talking about the history of how humanity stacks itself.
That's a great way to put it.
It's the story of what happens when we run out of land or when we want to be close to the action and we have to figure out how to live on top of each other without killing each other.
That is the fundamental tension of urbanization, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
how do you compress a population into a small footprint while maintaining dignity, safety, and hygiene? And the answer for the last 2,000 years has been the multifamily unit in one form or another.
So our mission today is to decode the jargon. We're going to talk about MDUs, tenements, six-packs, dingbats,
All the good stuff.
and really understand the invisible economics and the history behind these structures. Because whether you live in a detached house with a white picket fence or on the 40th floor of a condo, this ecosystem affects your taxes, it affects your commute, and it dictates the vibe of your city.
It dictates who can live in your city, period. It's that fundamental.
Right. So before we get into all the weird architectural stuff, and trust me, there's some very weird ones,
Yeah.
we need to lay the groundwork. We need to define terms.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, myself included, use words like apartment and condo interchangeably. But they aren't the same thing, are they?
Not at all. And, confusing them really obscures what's actually happening in the housing market. So
Right.
let's start with the physical reality versus the legal reality.
Oh.
Multifamily residential, or
Hmm.
MDU, which you'll see in the documents. That's the physical description. It refers to a classification of housing where multiple separate housing units are contained within one building or a complex of buildings.
So that's the hardware, the physical thing you can touch.
Correct. The hardware is multiple families under one roof.
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't just mean skyscrapers. It can be stacked vertically, which is the classic apartment block we all picture.
Yeah, the tower.
Or it could be arranged side by side, like row houses or townhouses. If the structure is continuous and shares party walls, it generally falls under this umbrella.
Okay, so that's the hardware. Then I guess apartment and condo are the software, the
Yeah.
operating system.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Those terms describe the legal ownership model. When we say apartment in the truest sense, particularly in North America, we're usually describing a rental model.
Right.
The building is owned by a single entity, a landlord, a pension fund, a REIT, and the occupants lease the space.
You pay for the right to stay, but you own nothing but your furniture.
Right. A condominium, or condo, is a legal innovation. Physically, it might look exactly the same as the rental building next door.
Indistinguishable from the outside.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But legally, you own the specific unit you live in, the box of air, so to speak, and you hold a shared interest in the common elements.
The hallways, the roof, the elevators.
The swimming pool, the gym, all the stuff that breaks.
So if the roof leaks in an apartment building, I call the landlord. If the roof leaks in a condo,
You and your neighbors all open your checkbooks.
oh,
Or more likely, your homeowners association has a special assessment.
that sounds less fun.
It has its pros and cons.
But this distinction matters because it changes how neighborhoods evolve. A neighborhood of condos has very different incentives than a neighborhood of rentals.
Absolutely. The owners in a condo building have a long-term stake in the property value. Renters, by definition, are more transient. And then you have more niche legal wrappers like co-ops, which we can get into later, or intentional communities like co-housing.
Right.
But the core concept is the MDU, the physical act of sharing a structure.
And this is where we hit the first major hurdle. Because in many parts of the world, and specifically here in the US, if you go to a town hall meeting and say, I want to build a multifamily unit, you aren't greeted with open arms.
No.
You're usually greeted with pitchforks.
Or lawsuits. That's the more modern version of the pitchfork.
Why? What is the visceral reaction against this? Usually the argument is it's going to ruin the neighborhood or it's going to bankrupt the town.
The economic argument is usually the loudest. It's the one people feel most comfortable saying out loud.
Okay.
Existing homeowners often believe that high-density housing will drain local resources. More kids in the schools, more cars on the roads, more strain on the police and fire departments.
They see it as a net negative.
Yes, they assume that these new residents will cost the city more than they pay in taxes.
And it feels intuitive, right? I mean, if I have a house on a quarter-acre lot and next door you build a complex with 20 families on a quarter-acre lot, surely those 20 families are going to use 20 times the services.
They might use more services in absolute terms, that's true,
Hmm.
but the per capita math, and more importantly, the per acre math, tells a completely different story.
Okay.
This is the concept of beneficial fiscal externalities.
All right, walk me through the math. Because I think most people, myself included, assume single-family homes are the gold standard for a city's tax base. That's what you want, right? Big houses, big property tax bills.
It's actually the opposite in most cases. Think about infrastructure. Roads, sewer lines, water pipes, electrical grids, these are linear assets. You pay for them by the mile, by the foot.
Okay.
If you have a street with huge lots and houses spread far apart, you might have 50 feet of road, sewer, and water line for just one tax-paying household.
Right, and that one family has to generate enough tax revenue to maintain that 50 feet of infrastructure forever. The repaving, the pipe replacement.
Exactly.
Right.
Forever. Now take that same 50 feet of road frontage and put up a 4-story apartment building with 8 units. Now you have 8 households paying property taxes to support that same 50 feet of pipe and asphalt.
Yeah.
The infrastructure cost per person plummets. The revenue per acre for the city skyrockets.
So the single-family home is actually a luxury item for the city. Like the city is subsidizing that spread-out lifestyle.
In many cases, yes. The research from groups that study municipal finance is pretty clear on this. Low-density suburbs often don't generate enough tax revenue to cover their own long-term infrastructure replacement costs.
So where does the money come from?
They essentially rely on the high-density commercial and residential cores to subsidize their roads and pipes. The Walmart, the office park, and the apartment building are paying to fix the pipes in the leafy suburbs.
That is a massive flip of the script. The person in the apartment building is actually subsidizing the person in the big house with the yard.
From a revenue per acre standpoint, absolutely. Multifamily housing is a cash cow for municipalities. It allows you to provide services efficiently. Fire, police, garbage collection. It's all cheaper per household when people are closer together.
Okay, so the economic argument against them is shaky at best.
Very shaky.
What about the safety argument? I feel like this one is deeply ingrained in pop culture, the towering inferno. If I live in a box surrounded by other people's boxes and someone falls asleep with a cigarette, aren't we all doomed?
This is a classic example of the availability heuristic. We see a dramatic fire on the news, a huge apartment block ablaze, and we assume it's the norm.
Because it's a memorable image.
Exactly. But if you look at the 2025 Pew data provided in our source stack, it's a myth. Modern multifamily buildings are statistically safer than single-family homes regarding fire.
How is that possible? I can jump out the window of my house. I can't jump out the window of the 10th floor.
True, but in a modern single-family home, you have very few passive defenses. The wood frame is flammable, the layout is open, you have drywall that lasts maybe 20 minutes in a fire. And you almost never have sprinklers unless you're very wealthy.
Okay.
In a modern multifamily building, the engineering is completely different. The building codes are incredibly strict. You have concrete fire separations between units, so a fire in Unit 402 stays in Unit 402 for hours before spreading.
It's compartmentalized.
Exactly. It's designed to contain the fire to the unit of origin. Plus, you have mandatory sprinkler systems, pressurized stairwells that keep smoke out so you can escape, and alarm systems that automatically dial the fire department.
That's a good point. In a single-family home, if your smoke detector goes off, it just makes noise.
Right. It wakes you up, hopefully. In a modern MDU, it summons professional help. The data shows that the death rate from fires is significantly lower in these high-density environments.
So our intuition is failing us again. We see density as danger, but density actually allows for professional-grade safety systems that you just can't afford in a private house.
Precisely. We are scared of the stranger's negligence, but we forget about the engineering that mitigates it. We trust our own habits more than we trust concrete and sprinklers.
That makes sense. Okay, let's pivot to history. Because looking at some of these modern buildings, specifically the ones popping up in every American city right now, you'd think stacking people was a new idea. But this goes back way before the elevator, doesn't it?
Oh, long before. As long as there have been cities with limited walls, there have been apartments. If we look at ancient Rome, the vast majority of the population, maybe 90%, lived in apartment blocks called insulae.
Insulae. That means islands, right?
Yes, there were islands of humanity in the urban sea. And these weren't small. They were routinely 6 or 7 stories high. Some even went higher before they were regulated.
6 stories. In ancient Rome. Without steel. Without modern concrete. That sounds terrifying.
It was. It absolutely was. They were built of timber and mud brick, often by speculative landlords, Crassus was famous for this, who wanted to maximize rent by cutting corners on construction.
The slumlords of the ancient world.
Exactly. They were prone to collapse and fire. The poet Juvenal wrote about how you couldn't sleep in Rome for fear of either a fire starting below you or your neighbor's building collapsing onto yours.
And I'm imagining the walk up to the 6th floor, no elevator, carrying your water, probably smelling your neighbor's cooking and everything else.
It was a tough life. And the social hierarchy was vertical. The lower floors, the piano nobile, were for the wealthier tenants.
Why?
You didn't have to climb as far, the apartments were larger, and in case of fire, you could get out. The higher you went, the smaller the rooms got, the shabbier the construction, and the poorer the tenant.
So it's the exact opposite of the modern penthouse. The best address is on the 1st floor, not the top.
The penthouse used to be the cheap seat. It's the invention of the elevator that completely inverted that dynamic.
That's fascinating. And this isn't just a Roman thing.
Not at all. We see this pattern globally. Look at Shibam in Yemen.
I saw photos of this. It looks like a mirage. It's literally skyscrapers made of mud.
They call it the Manhattan of the desert. These are adobe towers. Some are 500 years old, reaching 7, 8, even 11 stories high.
How do they not just dissolve in the rain?
The mud brick is constantly maintained. They replaster the exteriors. But here, the density wasn't just about space. It was about defense. By building vertical and clustering together, the city became a fortress wall against Bedouin raids.
So the apartment building is also a castle.
In a sense. And you see other examples. The Malice houses in Madrid or the Casbah in Algiers. Humanity has always found ways to stack up when horizontal expansion wasn't an option.
So if this is such a natural human adaptation to city life, why is it illegal to build it in so much of the United States? And I don't use the word illegal lightly. In many cities, on the majority of the residential land, you literally cannot build anything other than a detached single-family home.
This brings us to the weaponization of zoning. We have to be clear, based on the historical sources. Zoning didn't start purely as a way to separate factories from homes, which is the benevolent explanation you learn in school.
That's the story, right? We don't want a loud, smoky factory next to where our kids play.
And that was part of it. But in the U.S. context, early zoning and the ban on multifamily housing were explicitly designed to segregate.
The sources are pretty blunt about this. It wasn't just about character in an architectural sense.
No. In the early 20th century, you couldn't legally say, we don't want African Americans or immigrants in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court struck down racial zoning in 1917.
Okay.
So cities and developers needed a new tool. You could say, we don't want apartment buildings in this neighborhood.
Oh.
And since racial minorities and lower-income workers were the primary residents of apartment buildings, the ban on the structure became a proxy for a ban on the people.
It's a proxy war. You ban the building type to ban the demographic you associate with it.
Correct. And the legal language was barely coded. People would argue in court that apartment buildings brought parasites into a neighborhood. It was a way to maintain class and racial homogeneity without ever mentioning race.
And we are still living with that legacy.
Deeply. It's known as exclusionary zoning. It requires large lot sizes, deep setbacks, bans anything that shares a wall. It artificially inflates the cost of housing to ensure only a certain economic class can even get a foot in the door.
And there was a note in the research connecting this to labor markets. It frames zoning as a form of labor regulation. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this is a more modern economic take on it. Think about a booming city like San Francisco or New York or Boston. There are high-paying jobs there. But if you ban new multifamily housing, you artificially cap the number of people who can live there.
You create a housing shortage.
You create a massive housing shortage. This means a teacher, a firefighter, a barista, a nurse, all essential workers simply cannot afford to live anywhere near where they work. You are effectively regulating the labor market by physically walling off the workforce from the jobs.
Which destroys the local economy in the long run, right? Because if the barista has to commute 2 hours, eventually there are no baristas.
Or the price of coffee goes up to $15 to cover the wage premium needed to get someone to commute that far. It creates a brittle, expensive, and inequitable economy.
Wow. Okay, I want to step away from the politics for a second and go on a bit of a world tour.
Yeah.
Because one thing I loved about this research is seeing how different cultures solve this stacking problem. It seems like the form the building takes depends entirely on what problem they are trying to solve.
It's a mix of problem solving and cultural values, geography, economy, history, and ideology, all shape the building. It's architectural DNA.
Let's start with the problem of extreme lack of space. That has to be Hong Kong.
The densest place on Earth, yeah.
Yeah.
In Hong Kong, you see the evolution of the stack in real time. Historically, you had the Tonglao.
Describe that for me. What does it look and feel like?
The Tonglao is a type of shop house. It's usually low-rise, maybe 3 to 5 stories. No elevator, no garage. The ground floor is a shop, a restaurant, a hardware store, a tailor, and the family lives above it, often in very cramped conditions.
So it's mixed use by default.
Completely. It creates a very vibrant, chaotic street life because the living and the commerce are fused together. The buildings are narrow, deep, and they often have these illegal balconies and additions hanging off them.
But those are disappearing, right? I read that.
They're being demolished rapidly. In the source material, they mentioned the ones near the old Kai Tak airport. Those buildings had to be short because planes were flying right over the rooftops. It was famous for it.
You could practically see what people were watching on TV.
Pretty much. Now that the airport moved, those height limits are gone, and developers are tearing down entire blocks of Tonglaos to build towers.
And that leads to the Toothpick apartment,
Yeah.
which is such a great evocative name.
It really is. Imagine a building footprint that is tiny, maybe the size of just one of those old Tonglaos, but they extrude it upward 20 or 30 stories.
So it looks like a needle.
A needle sticking out of the urban fabric. It stands tall and skinny, surrounded by the shorter, older buildings. Usually is one apartment per floor to maximize window access on the tiny lot.
Which sounds luxurious, private elevator lobby, but also incredibly isolating and probably expensive.
And often claustrophobic. You're surrounded by other towers. But it solves the problem. How do you add density when you only have a postage stamp of land? You go up drastically.
Now let's look at a different problem. The blur of work and life. We see this in South Korea with the office-tel.
The office-tel, a portmanteau of office and hotel, is fascinating because it addresses the intense work culture of Seoul. These are units designed to be legal for both residential and commercial use.
So I could run my business out of it during the day and sleep there at night.
That's the idea.
Hmm?
You might have a desk and a meeting table in the same room as your bed and kitchenette. The furniture is often convertible. The bed folds into the wall to become a couch.
It's the ultimate working from home setup, but built into the architecture from the start.
Removes the friction of the commute entirely. It's for the young professional who practically lives at work anyway. It acknowledges the reality of the modern economy in a way that Western zoning, which strictly separates home and office, often doesn't.
Let's move over to India. I was intrigued by the term Vitara in Karnataka.
Yeah, the Vitara is interesting. It's specific to urban areas in that state. Think of it as a two-story complex with homes arranged in a row. It's similar to a low-rise apartment complex, but with a very particular local style. It's a step up from a shared tenement, but more communal than a detached house.
So it's a kind of middle density solution.
Exactly. It's that missing middle housing that a lot of urbanists in the West are trying to bring back.
Moving to Europe, we see a housing type born from pure ideology, the Eastern Bloc.
The Plattenbau.
Just saying the word feels heavy. Plattenbau.
I mean slab building or panel building. You see these in East Germany and the Panelak in Czechia and Slovakia. These are the massive gray concrete towers built during the communist era.
They get a bad rap.
Yeah.
We usually use them as shorthand for dystopia in movies.
Aesthetically, they are stark. There's no denying that. But we have to give them credit. They solved a massive housing crisis after World War II. Cities were rubble.
So it was a practical solution.
It was industrial efficiency applied to the home. They used prefabricated concrete panels manufactured in factories and assembled on-site like giant Lego sets. The goal wasn't individuality or beauty. It was equality and speed.
Everyone gets a unit, everyone gets central heat, everyone gets a roof.
Exactly. And interestingly, today, many of these are being renovated and are actually quite popular. They're structurally sound, the apartments are surprisingly spacious, and the green spaces between the buildings, which were part of the original master plan, are now mature parks.
So time has been kind to them in a way.
In some ways, yes. The stigma is fading for a new generation that just sees them as affordable housing with good transit links.
Let's jump across the channel to the UK. Here, the problem wasn't so much ideology, it was the industrial squeeze. The sheer number of people flooding into cities for factory work created some really specific and sometimes grim housing types.
The UK has a very rich taxonomy of multifamily housing. It's fascinating. You have the bedsit, which is iconic.
The bedsit feels like the setting of every sad British song from the 1980s.
It is the bottom rung of the ladder, a bed-sitting room. You take a large Victorian house and chop it up. You get one room that serves as your bedroom, living room, and often has a little kitchenette, a hot plate, and a mini fridge in the corner.
But, and here's the friction point, you share the bathroom down the hall with 5 other strangers.
That lack of private plumbing is the defining feature. It's what makes it a bedsit and not a studio.
And it's why they are disappearing, right?
It is. Tenancy reform since the 80s and rising property prices have pushed landlords to squeeze tiny, often windowless bathrooms into the units to create self-contained studios. The shared bathroom bedsit is becoming a relic.
But then you have something really clever like the Tyneside Flat in Northeast England.
I love the Tyneside Flat. It's architecturally brilliant. It solves the social problem. How do you give people density without making them feel like they live in an ant farm?
How does it work?
From the street, it looks like a standard terraced house, what Americans would call a row house, 2 stories high. But it's actually 2 separate flats, one on the ground floor, one on top.
Okay, that's a duplex. We have those.
But here's the genius. There is no shared lobby. You have 2 front doors on the street, side by side.
Wait, really? So even if I live upstairs, I have my own front door opening to the sidewalk?
Yes. You open your door and immediately go up a private staircase that runs behind the ground floor flat's front rooms. It preserves the illusion of owning the house. You don't have to awkwardly nod at your neighbor in a communal hallway. It maintains that British sense of privacy within a dense structure.
That's amazing. I wish we had more of that here.
Me too.
And then the sources mention the close in Glasgow and the court in Liverpool. These sound much grimmer.
They were. These are from the peak of the Industrial Revolution, 1800 to 1870. The close in Glasgow refers to these high-density tenements, 3 or 4 stories, built around a cul-de-sac or a shared courtyard.
Cramped.
Very. And the court was even worse. In places like Liverpool and Leeds, these were back-to-back terrace houses built around a short, dead-end alley. No through ventilation, shared water pumps, overflowing privies. They were incubators for disease.
So we see both the ingenuity and the desperation of industrial housing.
It's the full spectrum.
Okay, let's bring it back to North America. We have some incredibly strange mutations of multifamily housing. But before we get to the weird stuff, we need to talk about the baseline. We need to talk about the row house.
The row house, or townhouse, is the ancestor of most American urban density. It's the side-by-side stack.
Is there a difference between a row house, a townhouse, and a brownstone, or is this just real estate marketing?
It's mostly marketing and geography at this point. Structurally, they are the same. Narrow, multi-story houses sharing sidewalls. Brownstone is just a New York City-specific term for a row house clad in Triassic sandstone from New Jersey.
So it's about the facade material.
Exactly. And townhouse historically meant a rich family's city residence, as opposed to their country house. But now developers use it to make new-build row houses sound fancy.
Okay, so that's the standard. But in New England, they took the concept of stacking and created something unique. Enter the triple-decker.
The triple-decker is legendary in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. It's essentially a detached timber frame house, but it has 3 identical sprawling apartments stacked one on top of the other, usually with big porches on the front.
Why did this specific form take off there?
It was the immigrant dream machine. You, an Irish or Italian or Polish factory worker in the late 19th century, save up money. You buy a plot of land and build a triple-decker.
Okay.
You live in the middle floor. You rent the top floor to a cousin or another family from your village to help pay the mortgage. And maybe your aging parents live on the bottom floor so they don't have to climb stairs.
It's an intergenerational wealth-building tool.
Exactly. It allowed working-class families to become landlords and build equity. It's a tragedy that so many towns banned them in the 20th century, calling them fire traps and tenements.
Which brings us to the six-pack, which sounds like beer, but I'm guessing it's not.
In the New England definition, a six-pack is just 2 triple-deckers pushed together sharing a central party wall. 6 units, 1 building. Simple.
But wait, the notes say if I go to Australia and ask for a six-pack, I get something totally different.
You do. In Australia, a six-pack refers to those ubiquitous, usually pretty ugly, brick apartment blocks from the 1960s and 70s. Usually 2 or 3 stories, a walk-up, very generic styling. They might have 4, 6, or 8 apartments. They are the vanilla of Australian housing.
I love how language morphs like that. Okay, moving to Chicago. The 4+1. This sounds like a math problem.
It's a loophole problem.
Yeah.
In the 1960s and 70s, Chicago zoning had height limits for wood frame buildings and also had parking requirements. Developers figured out that if they raised the first floor up half a level, They could tuck a parking garage underneath.
So the building's on stilts?
Kind of. You have a concrete or masonry base, that's the parking, the plus one. Then you put 4 stories of cheap wood frame apartments on top of it.
And let me guess, the lobby is just a weird staircase down to the parking garage.
It's usually an awkward half flight of stairs up to the first floor. They are aesthetically challenged. They've been called the ugliest buildings in Chicago. But they provided a ton of affordable housing on the north side at the time.
And speaking of aesthetically challenged, we have to talk about Los Angeles and the Dingbat.
Ah, the Dingbat, an icon of mid-century LA. It is the direct result of the car taking over the city.
Describe a Dingbat for the listener who hasn't seen one.
Okay, it's a 2- or 3-story boxy building, usually covered in stucco. The entire ground floor frontage is just carport. You pull your car right in under the overhanging apartment. It makes the building look like it's on skinny legs.
It's a soft-story building, right? Which is a problem in earthquakes.
A huge problem. They're being retrofitted now. But the key feature is that the parking is front and center. It's not hidden. The building worships the car.
And they always have those fantastic names on the front, right? The starbursts and decorative flourishes.
Yes, that's where the name Dingbat comes from, those little decorative plaques. And the cursive script on the facade, the Capri, the Tahitian, the Royal Palms. They tried to evoke a bit of Hollywood glamour for what was essentially a cheap wooden box above a parking spot.
I love them. They have so much character. But they are being replaced, aren't they, by the new king of American multifamily housing, the 1+5?
If you live in any growing American city today, you have seen these. You might be complaining about one being built down the street right now. They're everywhere.
They all look the same. Why do they all look the same? It's like this Lego block style with different colored panels.
It's the building code. It's pure economics driven by the International Building Code. We call them 5/1s.
Break down that structure for me.
Sure. The one on the bottom is a concrete podium. That's a fireproof construction type. It usually holds the retail on the ground floor or the parking garage. On top of that podium, you are allowed by code to stack 5 stories of wood-framed construction.
Wood. 5 stories of wood sounds flimsy.
It's engineered wood trusses, oriented strand board, and crucially, it's allowed because of modern sprinkler technology. The code's changed to say, okay, you can build this tall with wood if you sprinkle the heck out of it. Wood is cheap. Concrete and steel are expensive, so developers maximize the wood.
And that's why they are everywhere. It's the financial sweet spot of maximum rent for minimum construction cost.
Exactly. It's the triple-decker of the 21st century, just on a massive corporate scale.
And then there's the Garlo, which I just love as a portmanteau.
A garage and bungalow.
How is that different from a garage apartment?
A garage apartment is a living unit over the garage. A Garlo has the apartment and the garage at the same level. It's a very specific, compact design.
I want to go inside the walls now. We've talked about the exterior shapes and the zoning, but the way these units are laid out inside dictates how we actually live. And some of these layouts are wild.
The interior geography is just as important as the zoning map. It dictates privacy and family life.
Let's start with the railroad apartment. This is a classic New York tenement thing.
Right. Think about a long, narrow building lot. To fit as many people as possible, they didn't waste any space on hallways.
So how do you get from room to room?
You walk through the other rooms. The front door opens into the living room, which has a doorway into a bedroom, which has a doorway into the next bedroom, which opens into the kitchen in the back.
That is a privacy nightmare. If I'm in the middle bedroom and I need a glass of water at night, I have to walk through your bedroom.
Precisely. It was designed for large families where that kind of Western middle-class privacy wasn't a priority or an option. It forces a very specific communal type of living.
And it's called a railroad apartment because the rooms are linked like train cars.
Exactly.
Then you have the basic single-room solution. Studio, efficiency, bachelor apartment. Are these all the same thing?
More or less. The terminology is regional. Studio or efficiency is common in the U.S. Studio flat in the U.K. Bachelor or bachelorette is very common in Canada and South Africa.
And now we have the micro apartment,
which is just the modern, sometimes glamorized version of the single-room dwelling. But even smaller, often under 300 square feet, with very clever built-in furniture to make it functional.
And what about lofts? People love a good loft conversion.
A true loft is a specific thing. It's not just any apartment with high ceilings. Technically, it means you're utilizing the vertical space between the structural floors of a former factory or warehouse.
So you're living in the space where machines used to be.
Right. And often you'll see the original cast iron columns supporting the structure, not the original load-bearing walls. It's a very distinct industrial aesthetic.
Now let's talk about the bottom of the market again. We mentioned the bed sit, but in the U.S. we had the SRO, single room occupancy.
The SRO is the most misunderstood and I think tragically lost form of urban housing. These were essentially hotels for permanent residents.
What did you get for your rent?
You rented a room, you had a bed, a dresser, and maybe a sink in the corner. You shared a bathroom and maybe a communal kitchen down the hall.
This used to be how the working poor or elderly people on fixed incomes or young men just arriving in the city survived.
It was the absolute bottom rung of the housing ladder. If you had very little money, you could still afford an SRO. It kept you off the street. It was safe and private, if not spacious.
So what happened? Why are they basically gone?
We regulated them out of existence. In the mid-20th century, cities started passing laws saying every legal housing unit must have a private bathroom and a private kitchen.
Which sounds benevolent. Everyone deserves their own kitchen.
It sounds great, but it raised the minimum cost of housing dramatically. If you force a developer to put a kitchen and bath in every single unit, the rent doubles or triples. We effectively made cheap housing illegal.
We sawed off the bottom rung of the ladder.
We sawed it off, and now we wonder why homelessness has exploded in so many cities.
That is a heavy realization. By demanding higher standards, we actually hurt the people we were trying to protect.
It's a classic case of unintended consequences in housing policy. We replaced cheap private rooms with either expensive apartments or congregate shelters.
And then you have the rooming house, which is slightly different.
Yes, a rooming house is typically a larger house where 4 or more bedrooms are rented out individually. The tenancy is short-term, often week to week. It's a different legal classification from an apartment building.
And in the Indian subcontinent, there's the mess.
A mess or a boarding house there is interesting. You get a single bedroom, shared facilities, but it often includes meals and sometimes even a maid service. The very common setup for students or young professionals moving to a new city.
On the complete flip side of the ownership spectrum, we have the co-op. I feel like this is a New York obsession. The board. The interview. It sounds terrifying.
The housing cooperative is a fascinating legal beast. In a co-op, you do not own your apartment. You don't get a deed.
Wait, I pay $1 million for a place on the Upper West Side, and I don't own it.
No. The building itself is owned by a nonprofit corporation. When you buy an apartment, you're actually buying shares in that corporation.
So I'm a shareholder.
You're a shareholder, and your shares come with a proprietary lease, which gives you the right to occupy a specific unit. The number of shares you own corresponds to the size and desirability of your apartment.
So I'm a business partner with my neighbors, and my lease is just a perk of being a shareholder.
Exactly. And because you are buying into a business partnership, the current shareholders, the board, get to decide if they want you as a partner.
That's why they can reject you for seemingly no reason.
If you go bankrupt or stop paying your monthly maintenance fees, the neighbors have to cover your share to keep the boiler running and pay the building's mortgage. So they are financially terrified of bad tenants.
So the interviews are incredibly intrusive.
They want to know your financials, your social life, your dog's temperament. In Australia, this model corresponds to something called company title, which is much less common now.
It's a gated community where the gate is a board of directors with a calculator.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And then finally, we have co-housing. This is the hippie cousin of the co-op.
This is where you have a private home but share a big kitchen and do laundry together.
It's an intentional community. The architecture is designed to force interaction. The homes are usually clustered around a common green space. The cars are parked on the periphery, so you have to walk through the common courtyard to get to your front door.
You're forced to see your neighbors.
Right. And you have a common house where residents are expected to help cook dinner for the whole community a few nights a week.
It's social engineering through architecture, trying to recreate the village.
It works for some people. It's a powerful antidote to loneliness. For others, it's a nightmare of committees and chore wheels.
I can just imagine the arguments about whose turn it is to clean the common house kitchen.
It definitely takes a specific personality type to thrive in that environment.
One last category to clarify because the terms get so jumbled. Row houses, townhouses, and terraces.
The great tomato of housing.
So, row house in the U.S. is the same as a terraced house in the U.K.?
Essentially, yes. The concept is 3 or more houses built in a row, sharing party walls on either side.
And then there's the back-to-back house.
That's a specific and now very rare type of terraced house from the Industrial Revolution. Not only do they share walls on the sides, they also share a wall at the rear with another house.
So you only have windows on one side.
Yes. No through breeze, very little light. They were notoriously unhealthy and were banned for a long time.
And the Q-type. That sounds modern.
Very. It's a late 20th century UK townhouse design. They're arranged in blocks of 4, with each house forming a corner of the block. It's a space-efficient way to give everyone a corner unit.
And finally, semi-detached, just to be clear.
One building, 2 separate houses side by side, sharing a single central wall. A duplex, essentially.
We have covered a massive amount of ground here. We've gone from the mud skyscrapers of Yemen to the fireproof concrete of modern America. We've seen how zoning can be used as a weapon and how tax codes make apartments the financial heroes of the city.
It really reframes the way you look at a skyline, doesn't it? Or even just a simple 3-story brick building on a side street.
It does. So if we have to distill this down, if the listener takes one thing away from this deep dive, what should it be?
I think it's this. We need to stop viewing multifamily housing as a problem to be managed or a threat to our neighborhoods. The history shows us that density is a tool. It's an adaptation.
A human adaptation.
Right. It's the most efficient and often the most vibrant and creative way for humans to inhabit a planet with limited space. The resistance to it is often based on myths and prejudices that are hundreds of years old.
And the economic reality that these buildings often subsidize the suburbs is something that really needs to be part of the conversation at every single town council meeting.
Absolutely. The beneficial fiscal externality isn't just jargon. It's the money that paves your roads and funds your library.
So here's my final provocative thought for you, the listener. The next time you're walking your dog or driving to work, look at the buildings around you. Don't just see an apartment complex and tune it out. Look closer.
Ask yourself, is that a dingbat? Is that a 4+1? Is it a toothpick trying to break through? Try to spot the history in the architecture. What economic forces, what building codes, what cultural values made that building look the way it does?
And think about the invisible lines, the zoning maps, that decided why that building stops right there and why the block next to it, filled with single-family homes, looks completely different. Think about who was allowed to live there and who was excluded by the very design of the neighborhood.
Because whether we are in a Roman insulae or a shiny new 1+5, we are all just trying to figure out how to live together in the stack.
And hopefully with good plumbing, unlike the Romans.
Hopefully. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.